Alright, this is my Avengers Endgame review, and I'm just gonna break it down by characters. I'll give you the positive and negatives of each character's arc and what I really think of it. Um, as for the story, it's pretty simple. The Avengers team up to go back in time and collect the stones, and Thanos finds out about it and travels to the future to prevent them from using the stones to thwart what plays out. Now he becomes aware that he succeeded in the future because past nebula and future nebula are linked. They're on the same network. When future nebula comes back in the past, that's how they find out about all the plans. So he intends to go into the future, use past nebula to infiltrate while capturing future nebula and disguising her amongst them. She acts as a Trojan horse. Once they have the gauntlet, they do snap everybody else into existence. But Thanos and his army arrives, and then a big battle plays out. Now, the going back to the past stuff really has a lot of fan service in it, and the final battle really has a lot of fan service in it. Uh, there's a lot of scenes that kind of feel unnecessary. They really slow down things to a snail's pace, but there are a lot of hilarious, very funny, very action packed, very exciting, entertaining scenes. But there's also a lot of plot holes in the third act. Things established in the first act kind of get really messy and chaotic and thrown out the window in the third act. They try to use this thing that, their version of time travel is this, that the future is your past. So going back in the past and whatever you do there, it won't affect your future because that's your past. It gets really complicated, and I mean the way quantum stuff works. I guess their explanation for this is you go back to the past, something happens there. Well, it bridges off into a separate timeline where I guess it self replicates people and into a separate timeline and contains that timeline while existing alongside of the continuity we're familiar with. However, that does get a little head scratching, possibly so head scratching that you'll claw straight through to your brain, through your skull to your brain, because this film gets really messy, but there are some pretty exceptional scenes. Now, I'm just going to start breaking this down by characters, but first we're going to start with Hulk. Hulk has reached this point where him and Banner are one and the same. It really just feels like Hulk is Banner now, and he looks like Hulk. You you don't get any rematch with Thanos. You don't get really anything that really pays off this. You could say that Hulk and Banner coming to terms with each other is real payoff to this character's arc, but it really does not feel that way. It feels watered down. It feels like an embarrassment. In fact, when he goes back in time and he sees strong, aggressive Hulk there trashing stuff, because they go back to 2012 where the original Avengers movie took place, and that he kind of he's embarrassed of himself. He hides his face. He sees that Hulk. I think it should be the other way around, because this Hulk is very watered down. He gets nothing pivotal in the movie. He's not the science. He's not the muscle, because it's Tony that figures out the time travel science. And he's not the muscle. He doesn't do any of that. The only important thing he actually does is he's the only one who can wield the gauntlet to snap everybody else in it back into existence. So Hulk was a really missed opportunity. This is not the conclusion I wanted for this character. His only other shining moment really is holding the rubble of the collapsing mansion, and like holding the collapsing mansion up to save War Machine and Rocket from being crushed. But other than that, there's nothing important for Hulk. This is really a missed opportunity. I expected better. and I didn't get what I wanted. I got this strange Mark Ruffalo Hulk that's just all smiling all the time. And one thing I've got to say about Mark Ruffalo is in the scene where Captain Marvel's talking about she wants to go take on Thanos and all that immediately. He has some dialogue that should have been delivered more seriously, but it looks like he's really trying hard to hold back a smile, and I can't believe what they went with that for the final cut. I don't like the Mark Ruffalo Hulk. Really, I mean, I thought he was actually pretty good in some of the other stuff as Hulk, but not particularly as Bruce Banner. Edward Norton was a better Banner for me. He had more of the body type, the build, and kind of the personality. The this Mark Ruffalo wasn't that great in here, but I mean, nothing against the actor. It wasn't well written enough for him to have anything of substance here. It's a very poor conclusion to his arc, and I'm gonna put that on the Russo brothers because the way he was handled in Infinity War, where we barely got any Hulk stuff, he refused to come out, and now here we still don't get any great action scenes with the Hulk. So I'm putting that on the Russo brothers because obviously it wasn't in Civil War, and I thought the Russo brothers did a great job. I applaud them for the way they handled Black Panther and Spider-Man. I thought they handled them much better than others handled them in their solo outings, their solo films. I thought the Russo brothers write them better. They obviously their skill set is much higher in their films than they are in their solo outings. In their solo films, they feel kind of watered down and less skillful. So I expected more from the Russo brothers. But this is the second time, their second time with the Avengers, and now I'm completely aware that they don't know how to handle Hulk, in my opinion. Now, you might have liked the way Hulk was handled, but not me. Thor is a big problem for me, too. Yeah, it feels like a parody of Thor. And now he was absolutely funny and all that, but he is a whimpering, drunken, fat loser. He is a complete mess. It sounds like a joke when you talk about it, but they actually did that. They made Thor a mess. He's all talking about the good times, and he can't get it together, even when they know they can. Even when they're back in the past and they're doing the mission that could fix everything, Rocket can't get him to focus and pull himself together. He slaps him in the face and everything. There was a nice little cameo from Jane there, and it was good to see Thor's mother again, and she recognized that this was a different Thor, and he got Mjolnir back. So that was pretty cool, but the Thor was just he wasn't properly handled. He was very mishandled. He felt very much like a parody of himself. This was really a joke as compared to the one we saw in Infinity War, and it absolutely makes no sense because in here he decapitates Thanos when they go to face Thanos. Thanos snapped all the stones out of existence. His last act with the Infinity Gauntlet, it severely weakened him. Captain Marvel sort of restrained him, and Thor, they paid off on that line. Next time you should aim for the head, because Thor decapitated him. There was a sweet moment before with Thanos and Nebula right before Thor did that, but 5 years passed, and they Thor became this drunken mess. 5 years passed. They couldn't figure out how to snap everybody back into existence, and because that Thor became a mess, you expect me to believe that this guy lost everything before everybody was snapped out of existence, and the people he are most familiar with, the Avengers he's most familiar with, are right here still in existence. So I see absolutely no reason for him to become a drunken mess, especially when he has still Asgardians, Valkyrie, Korg and the friends he made, and he's got the Asgardians, what's left of the Asgardians, so it absolutely makes no sense for him to be this mess of a character when you saw how motivated he was to bring down Thanos and continue on even though he's lost everything. In Infinity War, he got Stormbreaker, and he would have probably killed Thanos, if not, at least gave him one hell of a fight if Thanos didn't bail on that scene. And I feel like with Hulk and Thor that the Russo brothers realized that, well, with Thor, they realized that they made him too powerful and they didn't know how to handle this. They wrote themselves into a corner because Thor could have absolutely wrecked Thanos alone without needing the rest of the Avengers to back his play. So I feel like they intentionally nerfed Thor and Banner to make it where all the Avengers could fight Thanos and make Thanos still a formidable threat to all of them. I feel like they nerfed him because they just didn't know how to write it. And that really sucks. I really hated the way they handled Thor and the way they handled Hulk. And Thor, the conclusion to Thor's arc is that he's going to go off with the Guardians. And he pretty much tells Valkyrie she's the leader of New Asgard and all that. So that made no sense because I really thought we were building to King Thor, but I guess that's not the case. He's going to pal around with the Guardians and continue to be this sort of dumb jokester guy that's kind of a joke himself. That seems like a really bad conclusion. So, I mean, this isn't the end of Thor's arc. It may be the end of Hulk's arc. I'm not for sure because there's rumors about She-Hulk. But I didn't like the way they handled Hulk or Thor. They made the two strongest Avengers pretty weak. Hawkeye and Black Widow, they had some very strong scenes. Hawkeye, he lost his family. They show it from his perspective. It was absolutely great to see finally Hawkeye in this film. He's been running around for Ronin over those 5 years that everybody was living in this half snapped out world, or however you want to phrase it. He was running around slaughtering gangs. Black Widow was incredibly worried about him because he's the guy that gave her second chance, and he's just become this murderer running around massacring drug dealers and gangs. So they paired them up. Hawkeye, when he signs back up, when they finally get him back on board and recruit him, they recruit Hulk. They recruit Tony. Tony's the guy, like I said, that figures out the science. It's not Banner. Banner tries, but he fails. So Banner's really useless in this film. Hulk's really useless in this film. But Hawkeye, he signs up to be the guinea pig to test this whole time thing out. And it works. When Ant-Man comes back, it's 5 years into the future, so we're jumped far into the future now. Ant-Man comes out of the quantum zone and everybody's gone. The whole world's changed. His daughter's still around, and he finds out what's happened through her. And then he has this idea of the time heist because the quantum realm's what got him here, and he has the Pym particles that can get them to go through it again. So Hawkeye, they all pair up in teams when they go back in time. And Hawkeye and Black Widow, their journey was one I was not expecting because Hawkeye's supposed to have his own TV show where he's training his own daughter, Kate Bishop, young Avenger, new Hawkeye, future Hawkeye. And Black Widow's supposed to have her own solo standalone movie. But when it comes down to it, they go after the Soul Stone. They have their conversation with Red Skull, and they very quickly figure out that somebody's got to be sacrificed. And it was a really great scene. It was sadistic in its own way, like sweet, that's sadistic in a way because they're fighting over who's gonna die, who's gonna kill themselves. So it's kind of funny. It's funny, action oriented, a very nice, touching moment between the two. And ultimately, it's Black Widow that dies, of course, because, she's the one with the least to live for. So, Black Widow dies, and that makes me question her solo film. So now it's going to be a prequel, I guess, unless it's going to be like some kind of alternate timeline thing. But if it's going to be a prequel, then all the stakes are out the window. There's no real threat level to her, and that kind of sucks. Hawkeye has some really great moments past this, in the future when they snap everybody to existence and Thanos shows up and just blows the mansion to hell and back. It's Hawkeye that recovers the gauntlet and he's running around with it trying to keep everybody away from it. And when all the other guys that were snapped out of existence show up. He ends up throwing it to Black Panther, and there's this sort of game of hot potato. But he does end up having this really sweet moment with Scarlet Witch where they talk about Black Widow and Vision. And Vision, somebody I thought would be back in this film for sure, because him and Scarlet Witch are supposed to have their own TV show, but I guess that's a prequel too, so I'm not sure how interesting it will be or how tension filled it will be unless it's some kind of alternate timeline thing. As I said, they established the rules of time in the first act, and they kind of throw all that out the window in the third act, and it just really doesn't make sense the way they put it, that, your past, your future is your past, so when you go into the past, you can't affect your future, you can't change it, or what. It doesn't really make that much sense, honestly, and it makes even less sense as the film goes on. So, Captain America, War Machine, Rocket, they have their little shining moments, but I wish War Machine would have got more action scenes. Nebula has really come very far from the deadly assassin to this very heroic character, and there's a really missed opportunity there for her in the third act. She has to shoot her past self to protect everybody else, and the natural conclusion is you think she would die when she kills her past self, but that's not the case, because alternate timelines are something that doesn't really make sense, scratching your head. Yeah, it would have been more impactful if she actually died when she killed herself. It would have been emotionally impactful, and it would have been a great send-off to this character, that she went from this straight-up villain to this person that sacrifices herself to save the rest. That would have been really great, really emotional, really touching, really great way to send off that character. But I don't know why they didn't do it like that. The rules don't really make much sense to me. So that's a failure right there, in my opinion. Captain America and Iron Man, they have these really great arcs. They go into the past. Captain America fights himself, and there's this whole comment like, I can go all day, and he's like, oh, I know. And then after he defeats himself with the scepter, he's like, that really is America's ass, like referring to his own ass, checking out his own ass. It's kind of really funny. And there's this Hell Hydra moment where he goes into the elevator to get the scepter off them from Agent Sitwell and Crossbones, and it's really great to see them back, and he whispers the Hell Hydra thing into the ear. But of course, if you're going into the past and you're creating separate timelines, if this wasn't creating separate timelines, that'd really be a big continuity error for the way Winter Soldier played out. And again, I have to say that the rules are very questionable the way they explain this. Also, Loki ends up escaping with the Tesseract. So, Loki's somewhere out there, but I guess it's supposed to be an alternate timeline. It doesn't really make much sense, honestly. You can say it does, but I just don't think it does. So, there's some really funny stuff in here, but there's really a lot of questionable stuff. But when Thor's about to die at the hand of Thanos in the final battle, there's this really great scene where Captain America lifts Thor's hammer, and he goes to town on Thanos, ricocheting that hammer off his shield, and it's really an awesome moment. But ultimately, he does get put down. All the heroes kind of get put down by Thanos. They get beaten pretty badly. Hulk doesn't even get to fight. It's a damn shame. But they get put down pretty badly, and you get this awesome moment where Captain America is like Avengers Assemble, when all the dusted people show up, and they show up with their armies and stuff. You get this really shining moment where he says Avengers Assemble, and you got this mass army of Avengers fighting this mass army of Thanos. But of course, like I said, I don't like Captain Marvel at all in this film. She's incredibly overpowered. I see no way that she's supposed to lead a team. She's supposed to lead the MCU into the next phase. I don't even see how she could work with the team with her attitude towards being a team player, and that she thinks she's all egotistical, big headed. I got everything on my own. I can handle everything, and she's completely overpowered. She doesn't even need a team. She comes in last minute and just wrecks Thanos' ship, starts wrecking havoc on his army. And even goes toe to toe with Thanos while he's got the gauntlet on, and she's still beating him, but he pulls the power stone off and knocks the shit out of her, which was really nice to see. He knocks her out of the battle, but it took that much just to take her down. So I don't see how we're supposed to do an Avengers film with her as the leader. It makes no sense to me. She's way too overpowered. And she's really unlikable, in my opinion. Not for a second. I did not enjoy a single scene with her. And she got the kind of stereotypical lesbian haircut at some point in the film. Um, it's just, come on, man. But Iron Man's ultimately the one who sacrifices himself for the gauntlet. And I would have really preferred if Tony and Iron Man died side by side. Iron Man and Captain America died side by side fighting Thanos. That's the way I thought the proper conclusion to Captain America's story should be, that he should die. He's been this dude that's just Captain America. His world is gone. His world is gone. All he has is being Captain America. You know, but it's Iron Man who dies. So you only get two deaths in here. You get Black Widow and you get Iron Man. And even though Nebula killed herself, she's not dead. So there's some really questionable things in here. And Thanos dies twice because past Thanos gets dusted by Iron Man. But he's in the future, so I don't know. And past Gamora is in the future, but her Thanos is dead now. Her Nebula is dead now, and she stays in the future, I guess. I mean, they have her in the future with. She brings future Nebula to confront past Nebula, and she's introduced to Peter Quill, and she kicks him in the balls, and she's like, "This is the guy, really?" But after that, it doesn't really show her. I mean, it shows her in the whole girl power moment where, for some reason, all the girls on the battlefield all decide to come together at the same time across this mass chaotic battlefield. All the girls decide to come stand up for Spider-Man. Maybe it's because that picture that compares his ass to Brie Larson's ass. They want to protect that ass. I don't know. Spider-Man's the lightest man, apparently. All the women come to protect him strategically at the same moment, and it's really a moment of pandering for women, or I guess children, because it doesn't logically make any sense for all the women to come together conveniently all at the same time and decide they're going to protect this dude who's carrying this gauntlet. And you get really nice payoffs. Once everybody that comes back that was dusted, they all have conversations with the people important to them, like Peter and Iron Man. They have their Spider-Man and Iron Man, they have their big conversation about how they missed each other, but they pay off all that. He is like, we were dusted for 5 years. I didn't know we were gone for 5 years and all this and that. But now there's a lot of questions that come up with this type of stuff. And all these people have been snapped back into existence 5 years later. And the world is kind of in a crippled state. I guess they don't elaborate too much on it. But you have this sudden influx of this population. It's going to have some repercussions and consequences. And there's just a lot of things that aren't really thought out or fleshed out in there. And of course, this movie's already like 3 hours long as it is. So there's not a lot of opportunity to flesh out things any more than they already are. Unless you cut some stuff, and there was a lot of things in there that weren't particularly necessary. But so there's this whole big battle ensuing, and I gotta say, everybody really gets a shining moment. Ant-Man was really great in this film, and we finally get to see Wasp in an Avengers film. And they have this little moment where they try to get to the van. But, of course, that van gets blown up. Like I said, Tony Stark he sacrifices himself. He makes the sacrificial play, so he loses, his wife. You know, this is, of course, Gwyneth Paltrow's last movie. And so I was expecting Iron Man to die because you won't be seeing her as. And she showed up as rescue in this movie, but you won't be seeing Pepper Potts anymore around the MCU. And he left a daughter and he left his wife. He died to save the universe. So that was a great payoff for his character, but it's not a great payoff for Captain America. But Captain America ultimately ends up going back in time to drop off the stones all at the places they where they picked him up, to drop them off back at the exact moment in time where they picked him up, because it could affect the timeline, but all this other stuff's not affecting the timeline. So yeah, the logic is really, really a stretch. And a lot of this film is fan service, and a lot of this continuity problems, issues, flaws in the narrative, this whole time travel thing. You don't mess with time travel because it's really, really hard to not screw things up. I believe this wrecks the whole MCU timeline. Oh man, so Captain America goes back to the past to drop off all these stones, and they missed a really great opportunity to have him interact with Red Skull. They show they're waiting for him to come back, but he doesn't come back, and then they see old man Steve Rogers sitting on a bench, and Sam goes to talk to him, and he passes on the Captain America shield to Falcon. And I don't really want to see Falcon become the next Captain America. Like, I don't want to see a whole nother set of Avengers, like, replacement, copycat characters that have the same power sets that just take up the mantle. DC does that stuff a lot. I don't want to see that here with Marvel. I don't want to see, like, a replacement for Cap, a replacement for Hulk, just same power sets, a whole cast of Avengers with the same power sets. I'm not interested in that. I like Sam as Falcon. And so he explains that he did some of that living that Tony always told him to do. He did some of that living, and he lived a full life. Not sure what kind of life. They don't really elaborate. All you know is that he finally got that dance with Peggy. They don't tell you if he had, a full on romantic life with her where she was his wife or what, because I think she did eventually get married and all that stuff, and I don't know how this affects the Peggy Carter show. You could say that it's a separate timeline and all that, but why is he showing up in this timeline if all that stuff's in a separate timeline? You could say, there's so many things that just don't make sense. Nebula killing herself is one of the big ones. Past Gamora staying in the future and running off, I guess, because, like I said, you don't see her after that girl moment, that girl power moment. There's just a lot of things. I don't like the race change of Valkyrie. I don't like the gender swap of the Ancient One. I don't like these things, but I felt like their scenes were well in this movie, like Valkyrie on the battlefield, riding around on the battlefield. I felt like that was pretty cool, but I still don't like the whole gender swapping, race changing thing. I don't like it when they do this type of stuff in movies. But this film, I see a lot of problems, and it's just such a mess. I believe it's such a chaotic mess. I mean, there are a lot of great moments, a lot of great scenes, but there are so many flaws in its own narrative, in its own conclusion. I believe once the hype wears off, people will probably start to, really, really, see the flaws for what they are, really start to, give those flaws the credit they deserved. And not just because, not just overlook them because this is the big payoff film. I watched every single MCU movie. I'm a big Marvel Comics fan. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of the existing Marvel Comics as they stand in the comic book industry, because where they stand is with identity politics now. But I've always been a big fan of Marvel. and I've watched every one of these movies except for the Captain Marvel movie because, you know, I don't like Brie Larson for one. She's exactly what I thought she'd be, and I was worried there'd be some very extreme continuity errors in there, and I've heard that there are. I just didn't want to see it. I bet now the whole MCU timeline is just completely wrecked. They went to town, man. They went to town. I don't know if they like, well, you know, all this stuff we, you know, crafted so well and constructed so well and built up and really paid attention to not make errors with. Well, this is the end, so what does it matter anymore? Let's just throw it all out the window. Let's just go for it. Let's just go full on fan service and pay tribute to that. But I really feel they failed in the writing. They really failed in the writing because the proper way to handle Cap is to kill this character off, not give him that dance. Even though that is a kind of cool conclusion, I come full circle to that and finally give him that dance with Peggy. But the proper way to end this character is for him to die. Honestly, as much as I like Cap, he's my favorite Avenger. Um, the proper way to end this character is for him to die, and for that that would have a big impact on Bucky and Sam, and it would put them into this kind of buddy cop but competitive thing where they want to take on the mantle of Captain America and honor his memory. Uh, they could have done something like that where they're in this competitive mode for wanting to honor Cap and take up the mantle, but they're also they share this loss so they can meet on those terms. And I just felt like that would have been a much better way to lead into their series that they're supposed to have. Now, other things in here, I thought Scarlet Witch was absolutely amazing when she showed up on the battlefield. Just absolutely wrecked Thanos. Like, he had to call for help, man. Scarlet Witch is a badass. I really wish that Captain Marvel really served no purpose in being there. Every scene she was in, it just felt like she was awkwardly there just to include her, and it was bad. Scarlet Witch, you don't need somebody like Captain Marvel when you have somebody like Scarlet Witch. So overall, Thor was poorly handled, Hulk was poorly handled. These are not the conclusions I wanted for these characters. Hawkeye was well handled. Black Widow, I don't feel like they should have killed her off. I don't feel like they should have went there with her. I felt like Nebula should have died when she killed her past self, because that would have been made more sense for in every kind of way. It would have made more sense. I believe Hulk should have got his rematch. I don't believe that Hulk should have been so nerfed and on the sidelines as he was. I don't believe that Thor should have been this parody of himself because it completely conflicts with who he was in Infinity War and everything we were building up towards. I don't like that they didn't kill Captain America for the reasons I've explained. It's much more impactful, and this is the last time we're going to see Cap, unless they decide to bring him back later after throwing like a bunch of money at him or whatever. They could do that, but I just think it's a really missed opportunity that you could have really closed this chapter up properly to have him die side by side with Iron Man. And that would have been much, much better in my opinion. And it also would have, really served to motivate other characters forward, like Sam Wilson and Bucky. Now, as for the Guardians, I really don't understand the whole, Gamora coming back from the past and living this life in the future from an alternate timeline, and there's just so many things with this time travel stuff. And I understand that with when it comes to all the quantum physics stuff and quantum theory and all that, it's you make these choices. It bridges off into separate timelines and all that and stuff. But it doesn't make sense in the movie itself because you're creating all the. You've got Captain America who went back into the past to deliver the stones, and things he did there would obviously have some kind of ripple effect on the timeline. But he shows up in the exact same timeline as Old Man Cap. You got Nebula shooting her past self. You got Thanos coming back from the past and getting killed. You've got Nebula coming back from the past and getting killed. You got future Nebula killing past Nebula and still existing. You got Gamora coming from a timeline that I don't even know if that timeline should exist anymore, because all this stuff is just very, very. It wreaks havoc on the brain to think about it. But all the characters got some shining moments and stuff. I just feel like this was poorly handled. This wasn't the perfect wrap up. This doesn't live up to the hype. Of course, I went in without high expectations because people were hyping this movie up to an ungodly manner that it could never live up to. And for me, it just wasn't as great as I thought it could be, and I give this film a 7 out of 10, and that's stretching it. I barely give it a 7 out of 10 because while I appreciate all the great scenes that they had in here, some very funny and very powerful scenes, I just can't overlook all that, time travel stuff that really doesn't make much sense. You got Loki disappearing off with the Tesseract, and what's going to come of that is this is what's going to lead into his own show, his own series. Does that mean that Loki could pop up later in the MCU as part of this current timeline? There's just a lot of questions I have and a lot of answers that I don't. And Spider-Man is going to go back to school. And how many classmates didn't get snapped away like he did? We've seen in the trailer that most of his classmates are there and they haven't really aged. How many of them didn't get snapped and went on to already move on with their lives and get out of high school and all that, graduate? Because it's been 5 years, I imagine, and we are now 5 years into the future in the MCU when we come to these next films. That's a lot to think about. That's a lot to think about. So you've got to be very careful and cautious about the type of things you mention in your movie, because it can obviously lead to more flaws in the timeline. But there's also one thing that really didn't make sense to me is when everybody was snapped back into existence. They've been gone for 5 years. Hawkeye's cell phone starts ringing. Bet Hawkeye's been off the grid and living as Ronin, hunting down criminals and executing them. Bet his cell phone starts ringing. Why would he have an active cell phone plan? Why would his wife still have an active cell phone plan? And would the cellular towers even still be? There's just so much in this movie, man, to really. I'm just gonna end it here. This is 40 minutes into it, and I am done. We can continue this. Flesh this out and other things. But like, subscribe, comment down below. Tell me your least favorite moments, your most favorite moments, and your overall opinion of the movie. Do you feel the same way I do about the flaws, or do you think this movie is a solid 10 out of 10? I thought Infinity War was better. I give this a 7 out of 10. Stay awesome. Rock on.